All right. Hey, and welcome to Aromatic Whites. I'm Mari Coyle, Director of Wine here at ONEHOPE, and I am super passionate about spring and summer, where we are releasing and launching all these new aromatic whites. I know if you've been joining me through Facebook Q&A on Tuesday, we've talked about 3 of our new reserve launches, which were our Monterey Riesling and Monterey Gewürztraminer, and our North Coast Muscat, which we have tonight. Woohoo! And this is just a great opportunity tonight to talk about these aromatic whites that really flourish in summer. I mean, these are the perfect wines when you just want to chill down, chillax, and enjoy something that's just really easy, right? With your friends, your family, out by the pool, on the patio. These are just killer wines. This recording will be available, like I mentioned, in VAU. And please go ahead and punch your questions into the chat box. I've muted everybody for the presentation, but you're more than welcome to ask questions as we move along. And if anybody is just joining, welcome to Aromatic Whites. Let's do this. So I kind of was inspired by this because I get a lot of questions about Muscat itself, and we know there's Muscat, we know there's Moscato, we have a California Muscat Canelli, and I thought maybe we could just clear some things up and learn a lot from this grape variety in the process while we taste and also enjoy and pair the wine if you have your pina colada popcorn. My favorite pairings, of course. So just even looking at this picture, it kind of just takes you back on this slide to what life once was like in the beginning of history for wine, when the Phoenicians really started enjoying wine and including it in their social gatherings to relax a little bit, loosen up, and really engage in conversation. And I love going back to that because I remember first learning that in winemaking history, and when I got my winemaking degree, we talked a lot about history, and there's something so cool about knowing that this beverage had a place in society long before we were ever dreamt up, and that it still has that place today. And I think, you know, kind of just remembering back about what that was like, and these people and intellectuals that were gathering in society and trying to just elevate poetry and art and education and have these conversations. You know, they were enjoying a glass of this wine. So this is actually thought to be perhaps the oldest wine grape. And for that reason, I think sometimes it's overshadowed by the newer, more relative, important grapes, and so we don't always hear about it. But this grape is still important in winemaking across the world and has its place for sure here in California, and I think we're going to detect some of those differences as we taste tonight. Plus, I have something special I wanted to talk to you about, which is another addition of the Muscat grape to our portfolio. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys a sense of the history of this grape, and that it's actually traveled around the world as being part of a traditional wine grape. Okay, so perhaps the oldest. There's still the jury's out of whether this was actually the oldest wine grape, but its origins date back so far that we're sure that this is one of the originals and was probably in this old world region, right? In the Egyptian region, in Eastern Europe, kind of these older areas that we don't even think of in terms of France and Italy and Spain. So very obscure regions that were growing these Muscat grapes, and it's now traveled completely around the world to where almost every winemaking region is producing Muscat of some type. So pretty cool stuff, actually. So as I mentioned, the Muscat grape is actually a family of grapes, which includes over 20 grape varieties. So when you go, oh, well, there's Muscat Canelli, there's all these different Muscats that you see labeled, and oftentimes you wonder, well, what's the difference? Well, there's over 20 different of these grape varieties that belong to what we call the Vitis vinifera species. And the Vitis vinifera species is the species of grapevine that produces wine grapes. So, for example, if you live in California and you're not near an established and cultivated vineyard, but you're walking along a river canyon somewhere, you might actually see Vitis californica. Now, Vitis californica is another species of grape, but it's not a grape variety used for winemaking. So this isn't a grape that even actually produces fruit, where the Vitis vinifera actually self-pollinates and blooms. These flowers bloom and they create berries. And those are really what we call grapes. I've got some table grapes here just to kind of give you a little demonstration since there aren't any wine grapes. But sometimes people ask me, what do you mean when you say berry? Because we're so used to calling these grapes. But we call this whole grape cluster a grape cluster. Just for some fun technical information, what we usually would say is the stem, we call a rachis. That's the technical term there. And then each of these grapes is actually called a berry. So I just wanted to give you guys a little demo there on sort of the anatomy of the grape cluster, which is known to be part of this Vitis vinifera species. And these grapes are used in wine production as well as raisin and table grapes. That's another thing that you might see is around when you're shopping, you see these table grapes, they're really big. And truthfully, some of the table grape varieties lack a little bit of flavor. They're not quite as tasty as the wine grapes. The wine grapes have intense flavor. Each varietal has its own unique character, and that flavor then transcends to the bottle of wine. And I'm going to tell you how for these wines next. So let's take a look at this. Typically in Grape to Glass, if you're new, we like to review everything from the grape and where it's grown and the winemaking process, and ultimately pop some bottles, enjoy and have some fun and discover some of the pairings that you might enjoy these wines with. So we'll just take a quick dive into white winemaking, and I want to talk about how this is really special to these aromatic whites. And the aromatic whites is actually a family of grapes, including the Muscat grape. The Muscat arguably being almost the most aromatic grape. So I'm giving this little guy a lot of clout tonight by saying it's probably the oldest and arguably the most aromatic. And that's why I wanted to really emphasize on these wines tonight. But essentially, we take these grapes, as you see in the diagram, and we press them. And what we get is juice. The juice usually tastes a little bit like apple juice. When you've had fresh pressed apple juice, it tastes like a sugary, fruity juice. And at that point, the juice is then fermented in stainless steel. Why that's important is we've got temperature control when we're fermenting in stainless steel. When we're fermenting in barrels, we're in the ambient temperature of the cellar, the barrel room. So sometimes those fermentations are a little warmer, and that also really kind of gears the winemaking style. For these wines, we want a cool fermentation because we really want these esters to be produced. Has anybody heard of esters? It's not a name that you need to remember, but for your own knowledge and just for fun, the esters are, chemical byproducts of the winemaking process when you have these grapes that are very aromatic, and they are these really unique expressions, these very aromatic expressions that jump out of the glass. And those are actually created in the winemaking process. So this is sort of a chemical response to taking sugar and converting it to alcohol. You get this beautiful fermentation bouquet. And it's important for those to exist that you have cool temperatures. So that's why all of our aromatic whites that we're going to be seeing or talking about are fermented in stainless steel in a really cool temperature. And then the wine is blended and bottled. This style of winemaking results in wines that are really aromatic and bright. Their acidity can show off. They're not the big, heavy, creamy, buttery wines. They're totally opposite, where they're showcasing the aroma profile. These wines just jump out of the glass at you. So it's a little bit different than, let's say, our comparison would be a Chardonnay. So Chardonnay and Muscat are almost polar opposites when you're thinking of grape varieties. Chardonnay has more of this oily kind of apple pear character, and usually is made in a style that's a little creamier. And then you've got the Muscat, which is really crisp and clean, oftentimes a little bit of sweetness, just to pronounce the amount of fruit and florals that you get from the wine. So there's a little bit about just our winemaking style here with all of our aromatic whites. So let's go ahead and pop some of these wines. I'm going to use my handy dandy little corkscrew here and just show you guys as I open the Muscat Canelli. So this is our ONEHOPE California Muscat Canelli. And, you know, we were just at a wine festival and we were all going, how do you really, I was with some coworkers and it's like, how do you really do this with this blade? I mean, the blade can be confusing. So if any of you are watching for the first time, just want a little clarification of opening up a wine like a pro. Here you are, you take this blade, this thing that like doesn't let you bring the openers on the plane, and you go ahead and just get that a little bit of friction right underneath the bottle. So right there. And that's where you want to make your contact. And then you move it around the bottle so that you have a nice clean cut. Be careful not to cut yourself. And then voila, it's off, okay? And it's nice and clean, no issues. You're ready to serve. So that's what you do with the knife of the corkscrew. Then you can actually use the corkscrew itself to go ahead and insert right here in the center of the bottle. Have you ever had a cork where you end up using the corkscrew and it goes sideways? And then you're like, oh no, how do I get it out? And it breaks? Maybe not. You guys might all be pros, but I've had that happen before. So getting it right in the center here of the cork from the beginning really helps. And then of course you use this little fulcrum to just lift up partially and lift up all the way. And then let's see what this cork says today. I have found that among its other benefits, giving liberates the soul of the giver, by Maya Angelou. I like that quote. So now we've got our cork popped. What temperature am I serving this wine? Well, I like the Muscat really cold actually, and here's why. Because it does have a little bit of sweetness to it. In this case, there's a lot of sweetness in the California Muscat. I like it to be really chilled down because that helps sort of balance the sweetness and the acidity and allows the aromas to really pop as it's opening in the glass. So I'm going to go ahead and pour a little of the Muscat Canelli here. So this is the core, again, California Muscat Canelli from the California region. So I'm going to use my little Matryoshka dolls here to say that my biggest Matryoshka doll in this case is California. So this is the state of California. That means these grapes are from all over the state of California. Now I told you guys how Muscat grape likes to grow all around the world. Well, what that means is it's really versatile in its growing conditions. You can really grow it almost anywhere. I've seen it in almost every region of California. And we're going to find out how that grows differently in different regions because we're going to taste a couple different wines. But the bottom line is when we source from California, we're typically sourcing from some of the warmer areas, and you get a lot of really ripe, rich expression in those wines. And you've probably noticed that before. And if you also are new, I see a couple new faces. So if you're new, there are a million steps to tasting wines out there. But I like to simplify it into just 3 easy steps, which is to grab your glass and swirl. And you can practice. It takes practice to swirl if you don't swirl a lot. What I do recommend though is see how I have my glass about, it's almost a quarter full. It's not over a third full. That helps you swirl. If you've got your glass filled all the way up to the top, it's gonna be hard for this thing not to jump out at you and get all over you. So don't fill your glass up too high, but go ahead and swirl. As you take the wine out of the refrigerator, it's gonna start, warming up a little bit. I'm using a stemmed glass tonight. I switch up my glassware all the time, but because I said I really like these wines cold, I'm using a glass that allows the temperature of my hands not to get in contact with the wine. So that's the whole point of the stem when you're using a stemmed glass, is that you are not touching the bowl here and warming it up. So if you like, sitting by the fire, outside fire pit, one of my favorite things to do, and enjoying an awesome big cab, maybe you want it to warm up a little bit in your hands, and that's all right, okay? Or maybe you chilled something down, but you want it to warm up a little bit more, and you want to get your hands on there. So that's personal preference. Or maybe you just want to use a stemless glass because you're worried that your dog's tail is going to knock it over. And that happens too in my house a lot. But tonight I'm using this stemmed glass, and I'm getting my swirl on. I see some of you guys getting your swirl on, my party team over there. They're all ready. And so swirling, what does this do? Is this just to look like bougie, like, hey, I'm swirling my wine, I know what I'm doing? No, this is not. It's for real, because we're talking about aromatic whites, and to get the aroma, you swirl. And actually, when you swirl, those esters, those chemical components that have delicious aromas and flavors, come out of the glass. So the next step is to really take those in, just like you would go right up to a rose and smell the rose, like in the middle of the rose. You'd get your nose in there, right? Got to get your nose in here. So you got to smell it, right? I love this smell. It's so good. So everything on here, these flavor descriptors that you see, is really kind of what jumps out of the glass in this wine. The orange blossoms are so intense. This lemon and lemon drop candy, some of the zest of the lemon, and even white peach. It's just really intense, right? Can everybody smell that? If you have the wine, are you smelling these things? Yeah. It's kind of funny because not every one of the descriptors that we put on the label or that we talk about is something that people have smelled before. It really depends on where you grew up. Now, when I was a kid, we used to drive from the state of Washington down to San Diego, so along like the entire West Coast. My mom would get us in the car and we'd drive down, and we would go usually at night a lot of times, because I think it was about a 24-hour drive or something. It's crazy. And so a lot of times she'd be driving at night, and we'd go right through the orange blossoms of Central California. So when I smell orange blossom, I have a lot of those memories of taking those trips in the summer and smelling the orange blossoms. And to this day, my little orange blossom tree outside my house always brings me back to those times and those trips. And that's kind of what happens with wine too. If you smell something that you're familiar with, that's in sort of your reference, of your sensory reference, then you actually can take you back to the scent memory, we call it. So anyway, if you've never smelled an orange blossom, here we are. You can smell it right here in the glass, but maybe you've had a white peach or Meyer lemon or lemon zest, or we're gonna get into another wine that has even a lily, which I think probably a lot of you have smelled before. So go ahead and smell this. There's almost like a smell of like sun-dried hay to this wine too. It's really, really interesting and really pretty. Okay, and then you get to sip. So that's the final part of the 3 steps to wine tasting, which is just swirling, sniffing, and tasting. Wow. All right. So this is, sweet and plump and rich. So you get that white peach flesh, like if you were just taking a bite right out of a white peach. And it is on the sweeter side, which so many people love. How many of you have customers or you're at tastings that go, oh my gosh, I really love a sweeter wine? And then you go, okay, so it's the Muscat and the Symphony are like their go-tos, right? Those are our sweetest white wines, the Muscat and the Symphony. We've got a pairing going on. We got salt and vinegar chips, and now more orange and less peach. Awesome. So yeah, now we start talking about the pairings and how those really change the flavors, right? So the pina colada popcorn, this has got flavors of the pineapple and the coconut. So when you taste this, what you want to do with your pairing typically is take a sip of the wine, take a bite of the popcorn, and then take a sip of the wine again. So there's a lot going on in here. Wow. So for this pairing, I do get a lot more of the orange and lemon, a little bit less of the peach too, because I've now kind of changed it up, right? I've added these like big flavors and tropical flavors. So now more of the intensity of the citrus is kind of popping out. But a really fun match. And if you guys haven't tried some of our popcorn pairings, I really recommend it, especially for tastings where the host doesn't want to spend a lot of money but wants to have some bites for noshing. I mean, who doesn't love popcorn, right? It's awesome. So I am going to move right along here to our next wine. Let me see here. I didn't go away. All right, had to get my fresh glass. All right, so moving right along now, we're going to the North Coast Muscat. So this is our brand new North Coast Muscat. I'm gonna pour a little here. Now, this is from North Coast. Where is North Coast? North Coast is actually the northwest corner and pocket of California. So it includes Napa, it includes Sonoma, it includes Mendocino County, it includes Lake County. So this is an area that is one big region that includes a lot of other smaller regions, all within California. So if this is California, we've now gotten to a smaller region called North Coast, okay? And that's where this is from. So what does that mean? I went from large to small, but what does that mean? Well, now we're getting more of an intense expression of a similar grape, right? The Muscat family, same grape family in a smaller region. Only this isn't Muscat Canelli. This one is actually called Orange Muscat, which is another one of these types within the Muscat family, okay? So we'll go ahead and swirl the second wine, and we can start making some comments about this wine and then maybe comparing it to the California Muscat, how that's different, and what you enjoy about each one. Wow, this has a lot more intensity, I think, in terms of that Meyer lemon. I mean, it's really pushing Meyer lemon, and I get that floral component is now almost that exotic, spicy lily flower. So it's really different. If you have the two side by side, you're gonna notice how like opulent and expressive the California Muscat is. And then when you have the North Coast, you notice how it's almost a little more spicy. The flower and floral component has changed. It's more floral than fruity. And that's due to this cooler climate region that it's in, the North Coast. But this is like candy. It's crazy. It smells so good. Wow. Yeah, I could just smell this really all day, right? Are you guys with me? I could just smell it. If you were like, you can't taste it, I'd be like, fine, I'm just gonna smell it. But this is really unique. And go ahead and sip it and taste it if you have a pairing that you're tasting tonight with the popcorn or whatever else you might have. So a couple differences here as I noticed, like, ooh, wow, it doesn't make me sort of have like any sort of acidity on the side of my mouth like you would if you had like a lemon drop candy, but it does finish really crisp. And I noticed there's a difference in sweetness. So the California Muscat is going to be sweeter than the North Coast Muscat. And when we talked about these two different regions, California being a little bit warmer and the North Coast being a little cooler, that means that when we're growing these grapes, they actually have a little more acid. So there's more acidity to it, okay? So it livens it up a little bit. And there's just a touch of fizz, like a little spritz with this wine. And that's intentional so that these aromas jump out of the glass and balance the acidity with the sweetness. So they're both beautiful wines, and I really recommend pairing these wines with something spicy. So like a lot of the aromatic whites, we often go toward like the ethnic foods of Thai, Indian, all those spicy flavors that are really aromatic with different herbs and spices, even cardamom and curry. You know, all those flavors are really complementary to these type of wines because they're so floral and so fruity and so expressive. And the sweetness in the wines will actually really pair well because it complements some of the heat in some of those dishes, right? We get that spiciness. And usually when you have like, what do you do when you have something spicy in your mouth? You're like, I need to cool it down. I need to cool it down. I need milk, or I need water. I need something. And the high acid and the sweetness of these wines actually kind of cool that palate down so that you can enjoy the balance of both. And the wine doesn't get overpowered by the sweetness because they're so powerful, right? These wines are just super powerful, aromatic, and they're lasting on your palate because of the sweetness. They don't move so fast. Have you guys tried like Pinot Grigio? Where a lot of times if you're having a Pinot Grigio, not particularly ours from ONEHOPE, but sometimes you'll find a Pinot Grigio that's really light and just not very intense, right? And you taste it and it kind of like goes in and it leaves really quickly, just quickly crosses your palate, okay? And that's because that type of wine is usually pretty dry. It doesn't stay on your palate like the sugar molecules do. So the sugar in the wine actually kind of stays on your palate. It travels slower across your palate, just like if you add honey to something and you have that sweetness that really penetrates your palate, right? So those are the differences there, and those are what I recommend pairing these wines with. I think they're really fun for summer because of the sugar and because of the aroma. These make great cocktail wines if you're into wine cocktails too. You can add a lot of, you know, sparkling bubbles, sparkle water, another touch of lemon or lime to the wines, and really expressive. And as a lot of you guys know, in our rosé recipe, we have rosé with like a lemon simple syrup, and that is like lemon and more sweetness, right? So you could even sweeten that up a little bit with our California Muscat. So these are great wines, and you could serve them over ice if you wanted, if it's just really hot where you live. And because you could do that because of that sweetness, and you're not going to get that immediate dilution that's going to make the wine seem watery. So there's a lot that you can do with these wines. They're super duper versatile. And as you can see, these are just two different grape varieties, Muscat Canelli and the Orange Muscat, from two different regions. Now what I want to show you guys is something that we're opening up at the estate, at the property in Napa, which goes beyond the North Coast, right? Now we're in Napa Valley, which is one of the sub-AVAs, a smaller American viticultural area within Napa, within the North Coast, which is within California, okay? You guys following me? So we've got California, and then we've got the North Coast, which is within California, and now we've got Napa Valley, you know, a well-known, world-renowned wine region, which is inside the North Coast. And what we've got here, I wanted to show you, is our Napa Valley Moscato. This is really cool, hasn't been released. It's actually just being poured at the estate right now, but I wanted to show you. Can you guys see that? How pretty it is. I wanted to show you this because this is actually what we call Moscato. So this is made in a different style, which is the Moscato style. And that style is made by arresting the fermentation much earlier. So this wine has the residual sugar, just like these other two, but it's much more sweet, okay? Like this is like a dessert wine. It's very sweet, it's like nectar, and very aromatic. So it truly is like sipping on sort of the nectar of the gods, as sometimes people will say. And so that is made in this Moscato style. And I know a lot of you are familiar with Moscato, and the term is often translated to the Italian Moscato, which is a little drier and more fizzy and uses different Muscat grapes. But this is another way, which is a winemaking technique that creates this Moscato style from even a smaller region. And within Napa Valley, we get a lot of this really beautiful white peach. We get a lot of, I mean, mostly it's just like peach and apricot nectar. It's super pretty. It's honey. It's really cool. So that's a new addition to our family, and I think kind of helps you understand some of the expanse of what you can do with these grapes. But I'm here to tell you what most people do with these grapes is actually to blend even just a little bit into Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, you know, Viognier, almost any white wine that you can think of. Winemakers are always looking to elevate the aroma profile, and Muscat is the one grape that everybody goes to because it's so aromatic, right, as we just saw. So these are a lot of fun and super versatile. I think that's what our takeaway is, and I think it's really neat to look back and think that these could have been some of the first grape varietals on the planet that people were enjoying, and that we're able to still enjoy them today. And we get together with friends and start conversations about changing the world. So I want to go over a couple of the keywords and phrases that you might have learned tonight. Just briefly, we've got the Muscat grape. So this is the aromatic grape grown worldwide, noted in blending and various types of wine. And there are over 20 different types of Muscat grapes, of which we have 2 of them tonight, the orange Muscat and the Muscat Canelli. Very similar profiles, really just depends on where they're grown and the winemaking style, where exactly how they're gonna fit, but they're all beautiful and very aromatic and similar in being that complement and balance between citrus and floral. Stainless steel fermentation, this is something we talk about a lot with our white wines, and this is a fermentation taking grapes to wine, so taking sugar to alcohol, occurring in stainless steel for temperature control and without the use of oak. Aromatic, we've got 3 great aromatic wines in our ONEHOPE portfolio. The Muscat, the Riesling, and the Gewürztraminer all fall into aromatic whites. Esters, we learned about Esther. I've heard some people call her Aunt Esther. But esters are aromatic components in wine as a result of the grape aroma and the fermentation bouquet. What is the aroma? The aromatic component in wine that's contributed by the grape variety. This is super fun, and I always find this really interesting. There's a difference between aroma and bouquet. The aroma is the component that actually comes from the grape varietal itself. So if I say this has the aroma of lemon zest, what I'm really saying is that lemon zest comes from the grape itself and not just the winemaking process, okay? The bouquet is actually the aromatic component in wine contributed by the grape fermentation process. So that's where winemakers can have fun with stainless steel fermentation, barrel fermentation, different types and styles of pressing the grapes, and you can get different aromatic expressions called the fermentation bouquet. And lastly, here we talked about vitis vinifera. If I had to join a wine club, I think I would want to join the vitis vinifera club. This is a type of grapevines that are used primarily for winemaking, and we learned also for table grapes. Some of these grapes are also used for food coloring, natural coloring. We've got a couple grapes in there that are very, very, very dark red, and they might actually be in your kids' fruit gummies or in a juice that you drink or a punch, just for that color. So vitis vinifera is a species that's used for many different things. Let's see here. I'm going to flip over to chat. We had a question, is the Moscato in the Iconic Collection? Yes, it is. And here we go to talk about the impact, the reason we're all really here. So in our California Muscat Canelli, every 3 cases fund 1 day of a clinical trial for a person with cancer. So I always like to check the impact to date. So approximately 439 days of clinical trials for people battling cancer have been provided through our cause partner Gateway for Cancer Research. Yay to you guys for making that happen. That's incredible. Certainly one of the highlights for me here at OneHope is seeing that impact to date and just how much you guys have been able to do in our community. The North Coast Muscat, every 8 cases funds 1 hour of pediatric cancer research. So this is one of our newer cause partners. I know a lot of you guys were excited about, and we currently don't have the impact to date because it's so new, but this cause partner is Alex's Lemonade Stand. So woo, give a shout out to everybody who suggested that. I know that's one of everybody's favorites, is Alex's Lemonade Stand. And so amazing things happening with these wines. I hope that you found some inspiration to maybe use some of these wines in your tastings this summer. Encourage your hosts to try them, especially if one of these causes really speaks to them. But now is definitely the time for these wines. Summer is the best time to sort of enjoy this aromatic kind of floral bouquet. It's really, really delicious. Any further questions in the chat box? I'll go ahead and answer those. But I do want to thank you guys all for joining me tonight and uncorking change. Together we are making a difference, as you can see by these impacts to date. There's a lot of people that are affected by the work that we do, and it's a little bit of fun and a little bit of, you know, really stuff that comes from the heart that seriously impacts people in a positive way in our world. So I always like to take a time to acknowledge that too. Remember to enjoy our wines responsibly with your friends. And also, I wanted to invite you guys to our next tasting, which is in July. That is our Summer Sauvignon Blanc tasting. I believe it's July 17th. I'm just going to double check that date here. And we're going to be talking about our California Sauvignon Blanc and our newest member to the international team, which is our New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Have you guys tasted that yet? It's delicious. I know you're going to love it. So, yep, and it's July 17th. So please join me. Thank you all for being here tonight, celebrating together. This is one of my favorite parts of my job, is seeing all of you, and I couldn't do it without you. So have a great night. Enjoy your evening, and I'll catch up with you next month. Cheers.